So when you are doing your big stitches, your big stitch quilting, you need to decide what you want that stitching to look like. Sometimes you don't even have to have patches. So here's an example of just a square of fabric that I have quilted up, and I'm going to turn this into a tote bag, so you'll see that finished tote bag in a different lesson. So this one I just did lines straight across, running all the way across. They're not perfectly spaced, they're not perfectly straight, but that's okay. I try to make them straight and I try to make them pretty even, and this is the way they turn out. Just to give you a tip on how I usually do this, I'm going to try and show this straight down. I usually will start with a strip right across the middle, and then I'll do a strip at each end, and then I'll take that one I'll split the difference. So I did one in the middle and one on the side, and then I'll do one splitting between those two. And then I'll split those in half, and I'll keep dividing my space in half until it's filled up as much as I like. And that's one way that I can get, for example, this kind of variation where I've got some that are pretty wide apart and some that are much more narrow. So that's kind of my strategy and my technique for doing just straight line quilting. So that's straight lines without any patches, but you can also do straight lines with some patches. So these I just laid down some raw edge patches, and then I just did straight line quilting. I used the same method of just kind of dividing it in half and half and half again. This one, it ended up a little more evenly spaced. That was just by chance. Here's another one that you can see the stitching on really well because there's some high contrast there. So I just did straight lines across and basically just pretended like those patches weren't even there. I just matched my thread color to the patch color. But by far, my favorite kind of stitching to do with this is to stitch on concentric rings in the patchwork. And I'm going to show you on this patch because there's enough contrast between the thread and the patch color that you can really see what I'm talking about. So when I stitch down a patch like this, I start out with all of my patches just stitching around that outside edge. That's the first thing I do on every patch, and I do that so that it holds down the corners and I don't have my thread hooking behind the corners and actually lifting up my corners before I've had a chance to secure them. So I start out just doing a ring all the way around, and then I just start about 1/4 of an inch in from that first ring, and you'll see I go just 1/4 of an inch all the way around, roughly. I'm not measuring or anything, but it's about 1/4 of an inch. And I just keep following that around, and now I'm almost back to where I started. And I stop about 1/4 of an inch away and just keep going down. So you can see there's that corner that I turned. And I do the same thing. Just follow this line. And I'm coming back to my starting corner, and I just turn the corner. And now I'm in that third ring in. So I'll just keep doing that until I get to the center, and then I fill in the center spot. So I've done that on every one of these patches. So all of them, whether they're big or small, use the same method of just getting smaller and smaller and smaller, working my way out from the edges into the center. When I'm doing this kind of concentric shapes on a machine, I almost always start in the middle and work my way out. But when I'm doing it by hand, I like to start on the edge and work my way into the center. Now, what about the background? I've had a couple of people ask me to specifically show some about the background. The next thing I do is always stitch one ring around each patch, right up next to it. That really makes the patch stand out and set it up, and I like the way that looks. And then I fill in the spaces. So here I've done one ring right around that purple patch, and I did a ring around this blue patch, and I did a ring around this peach patch, and I was left with this triangle in the middle. And what I did was stitch the triangle just like I would have stitched a patch. I can't even tell, I think I started up here, it looks like. So I started here and just worked my way in to the center. And you can do that with any shape. So sometimes it's just an extra stripe, and I'll just do one more stripe of stitches between the one outlining the patch and the one outlining the patch. I've got just a stripe there. But I like to actually lay things out on my quilt so that it's not all straight line stripes. I like to have some triangles and kind of odd shapes in there sometimes. So there's just kind of a rectangle or more of a trapezoid kind of shape. Here's another, let's see, here's another triangle shape. There's lots of triangles. Now I want to show you one more thing, and that's working toward the edge. So when you get to the edge of your quilt, I like to just make my patches go like they're going off the edge. So I filled in, let me try and zoom out so you can see more. I filled in this space right up to the edge of the quilt fabric. Now this isn't a quilt that needs to be a specific width. I actually just took the width of the fabric is the width of my quilt. So I just tore off a couple of yards of fabric. And so normally my backing would be significantly wider than my top. But this time the backing is also the same thing, just torn off one length of fabric. So I'm going selvage to selvage, and I'm going to need to trim those selvages away before I bind them. But until then, I've made my patches go off the edge of the quilt. And you can see here, I can't go right up to the edge because my batting isn't very wide, and I need some amount to clamp over the edge of the Q-snap frame. So you're going to lose, say, 3 inches all the way around. So keep that in mind. If you're making a pillow cover or something, don't cut it 18 inches for an 18-inch pillow. You need to cut it like 18, 19, 21, like 26 inches maybe. So you've got plenty to go wrapped around the sides of the frame. But this is where it was wrapped around the side of the frame. So it's not quilted at all. Where I had it in the frame though, I just quilted right up to the edge of the frame. And then what I'm going to do later is just trim it off, just square it off. That's it. How to square things off is in the binding video. I'm just going to square it off, and those patches are just going to disappear off the edge of the quilt.